Riding around town, me and her now, under the city lights. She shines big when I look at her, that's why she's my bright eyes. Why she's my bright eyes. Coming down from the high love, no one can stop us now. We sit and talk about our love, no one can top us now. Look me in the eyes, love, tell me you feel the same. Your blue eyes pierce right through me, you tell me you feel the same. Over and out, I'm taking chances. Over and out, dead in the bad ways. Over and out, your eyes they light the way. Over and out, we'll never be done. Riding around town, me and her now, under the city lights. She shines big when I look at her, that's why she's my bright eyes. Why she's my bright eyes. Saying it all goodbyes, love, no one can end us now. Long fall from the top, love, we never have to face alone. Look me in the eyes, love, tell me you trust in me. My eyes wouldn't lie, eyes wouldn't lie to you. Over and out, I'm taking chances. Over and out, dead in the bad days. Over and out, your eyes they light the way. Over and out, we'll never be done. Riding around town, me and her now, under the city lights. She shines big when I look at her, that's why she's my bright eyes. Why she's my bright eyes. Why she's my bright eyes.
This is just the beginning.
I'm Mike Allen. Welcome to this Axios virtual event, live from my home in Arlington, Virginia. This is an Axios news shaper, and we have a special live breaking top for you, taking you inside our virtual newsroom as we cover Joe Biden on the brink of the presidency and President Bush and President Trump and his staff with very tough choices ahead. I'm joined by Naila Boodoo, who's host of our Axios Today podcast. Naila Boodoo has been covering this alongside me. Naila, we had election night together. Now we're going to have election week together. Before we plunge into our conversation, I'd like to thank the Bank of America for making these news shaper conversations possible. And thank you for joining us across all of the platforms of Axios events. If you're nearby the Twitters, and who isn't at this moment, at Axios, hashtag Axios events. Now, Boodoo, in this moment, you and I were talking off screen, like this has been kind of a day of waiting and just to catch people up on where things are. So our colleague, Alexi McCammond, is on scene in Wilmington, Delaware, where the Biden campaign expects Joe Biden and Senator Harris to make a speech at 8, no matter what. And Naila, the big drama is, at that moment, will he be president-elect?
Right, because of course, Mike, thanks for having me. We know that there's that magic 270 number. I think journalists never thought they would have to be so good at math, right? I know you know the old adage, journalist plus calculator equals mistake, but we've all been doing a lot of math and trying to figure out that 270. And I mean, at this point, we're still counting, right? They're still counting in Pennsylvania. We're still looking at Georgia. We're still looking at Arizona and Nevada. So we'll just have to see.
So here's a real quick rule of thumb of what we're watching for. So Pennsylvania is the ballgame, and they're getting close. The way that Chuck Todd said it on NBC is we're at 90% confidence. We need to be at 99.5%. So Vice President Biden could win just with Pennsylvania. To put something together, President Trump would have to win almost all the remaining states. And so that's the dilemma for him. And Naila, the president's big win, the president's big trophy, and one that we couldn't necessarily have predicted was your home state, Florida. It turned out that in the presidential race, that was about the best story Republicans have to tell. Did you see it coming?
I mean, I don't think anyone saw it coming. I think you and I have even talked on Axios events about how Florida was too close to call. And I mean, one thing I think I was pretty surprised at was the senior vote, which you and I had talked a lot about, how many more senior citizens were perhaps, or older Americans were going for Joe Biden. And, I think it's an interesting demographic story of Florida as well. There's been a whole conversation about Latino voters. I mean, as growing up in South Florida, we know that South Florida's Latino or Hispanic population is very different than the rest of the country. So not a surprise to me at all that they voted perhaps differently. And one thing I was going to add, with Florida, we have these states that are still counting. Florida did not have a repeat of the 2000 election, and actually counted early. And I wonder how many states, Florida had to learn a lot of very hard lessons from 2000. And even it was, Mike, if you remember, 2 years ago, Florida was derided as the laughing stock of the world in the 2018 election. And again, lots of changes were made. Mail-in ballot laws were changed. Florida was much more comfortable with processing votes, and more importantly, was able to count votes ahead of time, according to Florida.
And Natalie, you were telling me people at home, and so you're from there and your parents still live there. You were saying that people were relieved that they aren't Georgia, Pennsylvania, Nevada, Arizona, North Carolina.
Well, it's a lot of practical things that the state of Florida has done, in terms of encouraging mail-in voting, being used to that, having more machines, even changing the ballot design, right? And so one wonders how much other states will also now change their laws as we're seeing sort of what this week has unfolded for other states.
So now I'm going to take you behind.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you really quickly. I know we're almost out of time, but what are you hearing about from the White House and the Trump campaign?
Yeah, thank you, Naya. So to take you behind the scenes a little bit, so we invited both campaign and White House guests to come on. one of the guests told me they didn't want to come on because they didn't want to step on the national message and they didn't know what that message was. And that's a good snapshot of where we're at. Axios' Jonathan Swan, like reporting from inside the West Wing, shows so much finger pointing. People don't know what the legal strategy is. People don't know the message strategy. There's no field marshal who's determining what the approach is. And so you've had this scattershot legal strategy. Axios just popped up a story by our colleague Steph Kite saying that the math just would not work for the president in a recount. So the average number of votes that are picked up in a recount is something like 400. The president, of course, is thousands behind in the states that matters. The president put out a written statement from his campaign today that sounded very conciliatory. It was the biggest step toward a concession that we've seen. He said that this is about the integrity of the election, and I will always fight for you. But he didn't tweet it. He didn't say it. It was a press release from his campaign. So what we're watching is in the hours ahead, will he adopt that tone in person? Mentioned to you, Alexia McCammond is on scene in Wilmington. She says that outside where they do their events, you see the Secret Service, you see more bunting. Quite clearly, they're preparing for the moment when Joe Biden is president-elect. So we're about to plunge in to our marquee interviews. But real quick, now something interesting you told me was that in response from listeners to your Axios Today podcast, that listeners expressed thanks for one maybe surprising thing.
For being a journalist. I mean, I don't know if you've heard this, but I have heard this a lot this week. A lot of people saying to me, thank you for the journalism you're doing. Thank you for the podcast. We did a lot of extra podcasts this week and people really appreciated it.
Sneak peek, a couple stories that will be popping up shortly on Axios.com, so don't tell anybody. We have a story coming up about the 50-50 Senate, the possibility of a deadlock there, what that will mean for Democratic power. And we're going to take a look at what the president has in mind for the days ahead. Certainly historic times for our country. So we'd like to thank all of you for coming along on this News Shapers in a week that we'll always remember. And this is a day that we'll always remember. Sure to have drama tonight. I'd like to thank the Bank of America for making these conversations possible. And now we're going to join my colleagues, Courtney Brown, Margaret Talev, who edits our White House and political coverage, for interviews that were pre-recorded. Come along for this Axios News Shapers.
Welcome to the final event in Axios' 2020 News Shapers, America's Road Ahead series. I'm Courtney Brown, Axios' markets reporter. I'm coming to you from my home in Peekskill, New York. We want to thank Bank of America for making these conversations possible. And of course, we want to thank all of you for joining us. Follow along with the event on Twitter using the hashtag Axios Events, or follow us on Twitter at Axios. Over the next 30 minutes, I'll be joined with Axios White House and politics editor Margaret Talev to unpack news of the day and the November election. Yesterday morning, I had the chance to connect with Anthony Scaramucci. He's the founder and managing partner of Skybridge Capital. He's also the former White House communications director. He joined us from New York. Anthony, it's good to see you. Are you glued to the TV or Twitter? How have you been keeping up with the results that are trickling in?
Oh, yeah. No. Look, listen, I tried to hit Trump on the radio. It's like a multimedia attack of Trump. It was in documentaries. It was on the radio. It was in print. It was on Twitter. It was on cable news. So, yes, I'm hooked into all of that stuff. But I think that the people underestimate is the local news and local radio, Courtney. You can get on those shows. I mean, I spent a lot of time in Philadelphia talk radio over the last 3 weeks, just trying to get people to come out to vote and recognize the systemic danger that he represented to our society. So, yeah, no, I'm hooked in. I'm excited about the my family's originally from Luzerne County. That's where the vice president and Secretary Clinton were born. My dad was born in Plains, PA. And so I'm super excited that it'll likely be Pennsylvania that tips this thing, hopefully later today.
Yeah, I mean, as of Thursday morning, we don't know who the winner is. I want to ask you about the former VP, though. who at this moment looks like he could be closing in on a win. I mean, you support Joe Biden. Do you support his economic plan?
Well, his economic plan is better than President Trump's economic plan. You don't have to go by me. Just look at the Moody's report or the JP Morgan report or Goldman Sachs. In the Moody's report, they say that his economic plan has 7.5 million new jobs compared to the Trump plan. One of the problems with Trumpism, which is really a hijacked, deformed brand of republicanism, it's massive deficit spending. And sometimes very reckless behavior when it relates to public health and safety. That combination is a disaster for the American people. So, yes, I do support it because I think he can help heal the country, and I think he can provide a stimulus that middle and lower income people need. So, you only have two choices in the country when you're choosing for president. And we had 4 years of an unmitigated disaster under Donald Trump. So you only have two choices. If you're a business person, you look at the stuff objectively and say, okay, this person as a leader could not handle that job. They're unfit for that job. The vice president has 4 decades plus of experience in Washington. Let's give him a shot at it. And I think things will normalize and get a lot better. It's great for the markets. I'm running, $9 billion of Skybridge. His election is great for the markets, which has been indicated over the last 3 or 4 trading days.
Yeah, I want to ask you about the stock market. But first, if Republicans maintain control of the Senate, which as of right now, it looks like they may, how much will that hinder Joe Biden and the ability to get anything done if he, in fact, does win?
Well, listen, I think markets love divided government. Markets like the sclerosis of government. And so that could be some of that. But I predicted it won't be that because he's a very centrist sort of a person. He's given a couple of great speeches, which I think he'll deliver and turn into actionable results once he's president. And I predict that he'll go for some things that he can find common ground with Republicans. He's known Mitch McConnell for 3 or 4 decades. You could have an education plan, an infrastructure plan. There's lots of common ground out there where you don't have to beat each other's brains in and trigger each other and all the nonsense that's happened over the last 4 years. And I think the fact that will be in the background, I think people are going to be eager to show that they can bridge the gap for the American people. So, my guess is that we'll have some legislative achievements in 2021. You'll certainly have a stimulus plan that will be bipartisan because the nation sorely needs that. And the divided government will probably protect businesses from a big tax increase right around now. And I wouldn't recommend that anyway. I don't think the vice president's economic team would be recommending tax increases given how anemic the economy is. And I'll point everybody back to the 2008, 2009 transfer into the Obama administration. Even though they had tax increases as part of their platform, they weren't able to impose them for several years until the economy healed. So all in all, I think it's good for everybody. And, listen, this goes without saying, but I think it's worth saying. If you take a president off of Twitter and you end the bellicosity of rhetoric and the impetuousness and the craziness, and particularly as it relates to publicly traded companies, where he's tweeting about publicly traded companies or trade deals and things like that, I think that going by the wayside will reduce market anxiety, will reduce people anxiety, will reduce global anxiety. And so for all those reasons, this is a great day in America.
We mentioned the stock market. What do you make of the rally that we've seen in recent days? It seems like analysts are attributing that to this idea of a blue wave not, in fact, coming to fruition. How would you explain it?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. I think there's some fairness to that there wasn't a blue wave. The markets do like divided government. I also think that they recognize that the vice president and his team could be a very steady hand for the economy and for the stock market. If you look through the economic advisors that are advising Vice President Biden, soon to be the president-elect of the United States, you have Larry Summers, you have guys like Gene Sperling. These are guys that long-term players in the stock market on Wall Street have an enormous amount of respect for. And so, again, I predict that Joe Biden, Vice President Biden, as president, will govern from the center. I think it's meaningful to the market to recognize that President Trump got the second highest vote tally in presidential history. Of course, Joe Biden got a higher vote tally, but I think that tells you about where the sentiment is in the country. And I think the stock market likes that. I think the stock market likes the division in the country. That usually augurs well for U.S. stocks.
We have a few audience questions that I want to be sure to get in. Someone from Los Angeles asked, as of this moment, we don't know who the winner of the 2020 election is. That being the case, what's your outlook for the economy over the next 4 years?
Okay, so I'm going to be a little bit bolder than you because I sort of looking at the numbers and looking at the data, I think we're going to know very quickly. And so I predict that this will be very good for the economy. I point out to people that 120 years of stock market activity since 1900, Democratic administrations have done better in terms of market performance. They've done better in terms of lower unemployment numbers and higher GDP numbers. So you just look at that. You could go to Jeff Hirsch's Stock Trader Almanac. You can see all the details there. And so the combination of a stimulus and what I predict will be a lack of a big tax hike for individuals and corporations. Some of that's born from the divided government. Some of that's born from the need to re-stimulate the economy as we get to a more normalized economy after the pandemic ends. I think we're gonna be off to the races here. Remember, the Fed has inducted $2.4 trillion of capital. And just to give everybody the magnitude of that, in the 2008 crisis, they had only inducted about $1.5 trillion. And so you've done almost 60% more. And they're saying they have another $1.5 to $2 trillion to go. And I think that gives a lot of buoyancy to markets and the economy.
Final question for you, Anthony. The former vice president spoke at a conference that your company held in 2017. I mean, this was obviously before your stint at the White House and before your falling out with President Trump. But did he say anything in that speech that resonated with you?
Well, he was really talking about his foundation. He was really talking about the initiatives that he was going to undertake after his career of government service had ended. I also had dinner with him that night with about 20 business executives and hedge fund managers and former public servants. John Brennan was actually at that dinner with us, Steve Cohen from Point 72, et cetera. And it was very clear at the dinner that he was not running for president. He had no thought of running for president in May of 2017. And I think that obviously changed later on when it became clear that he seemed to be the most acceptable candidate to take on President Trump. And obviously President Trump thought that, otherwise he wouldn't have tried to bribe the Ukrainian president to hijack the Ukrainian president on federal funding to try to dig up dirt on the vice president. So, listen, he's a great guy. The first time I met him was in January 2016. We worked on the Human Rights Initiative for Gay Marriage and Marriage Equality globally at the World Economic Forum. I had worked on that project in New York State 10 or 12 years ago to legalize marriage equality. So I'm one of the Republicans who's always been for equal rights and marriage equality rights, et cetera. And so I had the opportunity to spend some time with him in Davos in January. And then, of course, we got a chance to spend a lot of time together in May of 2017. So very capable guy. He's got a big heart, and I think he's going to make a great president.
Have you spoken to the Biden campaign at all?
Yes.
Okay, about what?
Direct touch with them. Well, no, listen, I've provided some media surrogacy for them. Obviously, I've worked with the Lincoln Project, and I limited my fundraising to the Lincoln Project because I'm a lifelong Republican, and those are some of my pals that we've worked with together on campaigns prior. But I have been talking to people inside the campaign. I think it was very important for the vice president to stay on message and be disciplined as the president was doing all the nonsense of the nicknaming and all the stuff that he did to derail the other 18 establishment politicians, I think the tack that he took and the self-defense mechanisms that he used were brilliant. I know a lot about President Trump. I know how he thinks. I know how he operates. I understand the mechanisms of his decision making, and I tried to provide some of that insight to some of the people in that campaign.
Okay. Thank you so much, Anthony, for joining us. And we want to thank our sponsor again, Bank of America. After a quick video from them, Bank of America, stay tuned for a segment with the Lincoln Project, Steve Schmidt, and White House and politics editor for Axios, Margaret Tallis.
We are proud to celebrate our mentors, mentees, and those who have supported our Global Ambassadors program in partnership with Vital Voices. What started 10 years ago has led to Bank of America creating additional programs and new partnerships that have helped train, mentor, and fund more than 30,000 women who not only seek their own financial success, but who bring that success to bear on their families and communities around the world. Together, we will continue to expand our thinking and our efforts to help accelerate the impact of women everywhere.
Hi, my name is Margaret Tallis, and I'm the White House and politics editor at Axios. Our next guest is the co-founder of the Lincoln Project, Steve Schmidt. Hi, Steve. How are you?
I'm good, Margaret. How are you?
I mean, it's been a very long week, but I think I'm doing okay. Listen, let's just jump right in. The Lincoln Project became this huge, buzzy national advocacy movement because of its anti-Trump ads, galvanized a ton of attention. And I want to ask you, now that we're in the end stages of the presidential election, how big a role do you think that the Lincoln Project ended up playing in the final results?
I think that when we get into the state-by-state returns, we're going to be able to analyze, where we spent. A lot of the coverage of the Lincoln Project was on the ads, were on a specific category of ad, the ads that were targeted to Trump that were designed to make him react, to destabilize his campaign. But we did a lot of targeting. We spent a lot of money in the last weeks in Georgia. We did a lot of grassroots activity. We had partners that range from the rapper Offset, who was in Georgia for us on the days leading into the election, to a group of Black ministers and activists in Philadelphia. And we've always had the approach that it was a game of small numbers. So, look, I think that there was a moment when Joe Biden was becoming the nominee, as he was putting his campaign together, that we took the fight to Donald Trump. And our goal was to be some of his principal antagonists in the race. And, I think that we were effective in accomplishing what we wanted to do in defining the race around Trump. We've always thought that the race was about one thing. It was about Trump. It wasn't about issues. It wasn't about policy. To the degree that you look at the Senate returns and you look at the House returns, I think that validates that point of view. So, look, I think we were part of a broad coalition. Talked to Senator Sanders about this. It went, from Senator Sanders and his supporters on one side to us on the others, and a lot of people in between, who all are faithful to American democracy. And that's what this is about. That's what we see playing out right now. I mean, we see a president up there, talking garbage, nonsense, lies, delusions, right, about claims around fraud, around an election that he's clearly lost or is about to lose. And so that's what it was about. And we were in the fight. We were in for a good fight on the right side in our view, and are proud to be part of this coalition that has elected a good man over a terrible one.
Just for anyone who isn't familiar, I don't know how you wouldn't be at this point if you follow politics, but for anyone who isn't familiar with the Lincoln Project, you are a group of either current Republicans or longtime Republicans recently converted maybe to independent status. I'm curious, and maybe you know this answer, maybe you don't. I'm not sure how you find out, but do you have a sense of whether you were more effective in swaying Republicans and independents, or whether you were actually more effective in terms of galvanizing Democrats? I know who you thought you were messaging to. Is that who you ended up messaging to?
Who we ended up messaging to is much more expansive than who we set out trying to message to. But I think when you look at, for example, Republican vote share that went to Biden in a state like Wisconsin, we have early indicators that our strategy was successful in reaching Republicans who could be reached in the states that are going to determine the outcome of the presidency. I mean, I think I've been doing this for a long time, and the one thing is that there's a lot of smoke, that comes from the exit polls where people make broad sweeping conclusions about what worked, what didn't work, and that is almost always invariably wrong in the initial analysis. The fog of war holds up in politics as well, and so we're going to know, I think, in the next week or so, and we're going to be analyzing everything we did. What did we do right? What did we do wrong? Where could we have been more impactful? Did we spend money here that we should have spent there? And so on and so forth. But early indications are where we targeted voters, our efforts have been successful, we think.
Usually if you're going back and doing an after action report, it's because you want to know how to be most successful next time around. But your group was formed foundationally on opposing Trump. So unless Trump runs again in 4 years, which actually is possible, what kind of advocacy role do you think you would serve in future GOP primaries or future general elections when it's not about Trump anymore?
Well, we said when we started this that our goal was to destroy Trump and Trumpism. And Trumpism is here, and it's manifested with the reactions and the silent complicity of Republicans who refuse to condemn, even now, a president who will be out of power in January, his attempts to subvert American democracy. So what is Trumpism? Trumpism, I believe, is a statist, authoritarian ideology with fascistic markers that is rooted in America's polity, in our political soil, like an invasive species, like a noxious weed. And it's going to take a long time to root it out of the country. All over the world, we see democratic rescission. It is not a mistake that Nigel Farage is on a stage with Trump in Arizona. It is part of a global illiberal movement. Countries like Hungary and Poland, former Eastern Bloc countries that are NATO and EU members, are not functioning democracies anymore. We're going to fight for American democracy, for democratic values, and we're going to do it internationally as well. We also have a point of view that we need to reform American democracy. We will advocate and work with Democratic partners to advance a new Civil Rights Act in this country, a Voting Rights Act in this country, Election Security Act, protections from foreign interference, Election Day modernization. And then there are a number of issues where 80% of the country agrees on that will be part of a coalition as Joe Biden seeks to tackle coronavirus and to get the economy moving and to restore America's way of life that's been shattered by the Trump presidency.
So it sounds like, have no doubt about it, you will be engaged in U.S. primaries and general elections and overseas campaigns as well.
I don't know that we'll be involved in Republican primaries except for the rarest of circumstances, but we'll be involved in general elections. Look, in the House of Representatives, there are more QAnon candidates now than there are minorities, QAnon members than there are minority members. And 2 years from now, the Republican Party is going to be crazier than it is today. It's going to be more extreme. Majority of its members will not accept the legitimacy of this election. It will plague this country with stab in the back theories. Power will diffuse more broadly and directly to the entertainment wing of the party, Fox News, OAN, Trump TV, whatever's coming next. And so we're going to fight, we're going to oppose this, and we're going to be around to do that.
I have two super quick questions, and we have about a minute left. So speed round. Number one, you're sitting on a trove of Democratic voter data. Are you still a GOP operative at heart? Is that data for sale, or is it only the property of the Lincoln Project?
Look, we have almost 500,000 donors. We'll have raised almost $80 million. We have a lot of data that allows us to build from, and to be in a fighting position, for American democracy over the years ahead. And
you're hanging on to that yourself.
What's that?
You're hanging on to that yourself. You're not selling it to other campaigns.
No. Well, I mean, no one has asked about it, and I really haven't thought about it. But look, we've worked. I think one of the things that will surprise people when the story of this is told, like who our partners were in a lot of states. We have some great relationships where we picked up the phone and partnered with people who weren't expecting to be working with a group of former Republicans that we've built great relationships with. And so if the data is helpful for the cause, we'll share the data. If it's helpful for ours, we'll use the data. It's, we want to help people win.
We are out of time, but super quick under the wire question. Have you made any decisions yet about your beyond politics options? I know you guys were talking to United Talent Agency. There are offers for TV shows or maybe movies or podcasts. Can you tease what's to come for Lincoln Media?
I don't know yet. We experimented with a streaming service that we were really satisfied with. We were amazed by the numbers of it. And so we're looking at a number of kind of options and opportunities. And, we have a very specific point of view about some things that we want to communicate. We think there's a market for it. So stay tuned. We'll see what happens. I know everyone is just like right now, just waiting for this race to be called and waiting for Republicans to stand up, right, at long last, like finally now, and to say in America, right, our leaders are chosen by the people, and the people chose Joe Biden. Get the hell out of the White House. Start packing, right? That's what we need to hear today. That's what we're focused on, and I think that's what the whole country is waiting to hear.
Steve Schmidt, thank you very much for joining Axios.
My pleasure.
And thanks to our sponsor, Bank of America. After another video from our sponsor, stay tuned for our final segment with Rhode Island Senator Sheldon Whitehouse.
The racial and economic disparities that have long existed in this country have only been widened by the coronavirus and amplified by the most recent acts of injustice. People around the world are coming together with greater urgency to demand action. At Bank of America, we know we all have a role to play to overcome the very real consequences of systemic racism and inequity. This includes individuals, governments, nonprofits, and the private sector. Racial equality and economic opportunity are deeply connected. That's why Bank of America has committed $1 billion over 4 years to address critical gaps in affordable housing, access to healthcare, employment and job skills, and the resources small businesses need to succeed. We can do more, and we need to do more now to further advance racial equality and economic opportunity for all.
Our final guest is the senator from Rhode Island, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, joining us from Newport. Hello, Senator Whitehouse.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Well, you're welcome, and thanks for making some time for us on what is obviously a very busy and pivotal news day in American politics. Let's start out here with a real simple question for you. Do you have any doubt that the next president will be Joe Biden? And when do you think that will ultimately be resolved?
I think in the next 2 or 3 days, probably. And I'm probably at about 95% certainty, which is pretty certain in politics.
Who is ultimately going to resolve this question if what we've seen from President Trump in the last couple of days, he is talking about lawsuits, contesting results, making claims without basis that there's been, rampant fraud or election theft. If he doesn't accept the results and they go in Joe Biden's favor, who and how and when is the ultimate authority to resolve this issue?
Well, ultimately, when Joe Biden is sworn in as the next president of the United States, the Secret Service and the White House staff are under an obligation to get trespassers out of the White House for him. And it'll be up to President Trump whether he wants his last image as president to be him being frog marched out of the White House by large Secret Service agents, or whether he's going to try to salvage a little dignity.
But you don't really expect that would be the scenario, do you? I mean, it's more likely, do you?
I think by then the Republican Party will have coalesced around a different way of doing business. There are probably going to be a few people who want to go down with the ship with him. But I think for a lot of people, I've got a lot of colleagues who are going to find the end of Donald Trump a real relief. And by colleagues, I mean Republican colleagues.
Have people told you that directly?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Do you want to share any names during this interview session?
Okay. Otherwise, they'll never say anything like that to me again.
I mean, I guess what I'm curious about, this is process more than anything else, but do you think that this is ultimately going to come before the Supreme Court, or are you doubtful that the Supreme Court would have any reason or agree to hear a dispute over the adjudication of this election?
They would be, I think, hard-pressed to hear it for a whole lot of reasons. One is that it puts Judge Barrett into a very awkward recusal situation. That actually pertains a little bit to Judge Gorsuch and Judge Kavanaugh because of all the peculiarities and political chicanery around their nominations and appointments. So I think from the court's perspective as an institution, to stay away from this, I think would be seen by the judges as in their best interest. It also looks like the count has been done in a pretty legitimate way, and you'd have to build a pretty strong factual record that something was awry before the court would be interested, before it could get that far up to the court. And I don't see where that factual record is going to come from. There have been lots of allegations of fraud, but it's all been just talk, and there's been no evidence to support any of it. And whenever they go into court, they get their doors blown out.
And we should be clear, at the time that you and I are talking this morning, neither Pennsylvania nor the final election results, the Electoral College results, have been declared yet by the Associated Press. But we can see whether...
At this point, the president is up in both new president, President Biden, is up in both Pennsylvania and in Georgia, but neither state has been called by anyone.
So, and I want to shift to actually talking about the Senate in a second. Last question on the sort of procedure of this moment and what we expect to be a transition. Would you be looking to Mitch McConnell to be kind of the most important Republican to send cues to the president, or would you be looking to Attorney General Barr? Who do you think is the sort of authoritative Republican member of leadership in some capacity who will be the one who the president may be taking his cues from?
Well, those would both be pretty strong. If the Attorney General said, look, these aren't cases that I can bring to court, there's just no credibility to them, that would be a pretty strong signal to the courts. And if it's only the campaign there, Barr has now jumped into enough political stuff that I think it would send a signal if he stayed out of this one. And then, of course, Mitch is a critical person if there are any games to be played in Congress. And if he were to say, look, we've got to grow up here and recognize that this is now over, that's also those are the two most powerful signals I can think of.
So now let's move on to
other than Fox and Friends.
One way or another, one party is going to be in charge of the Senate, although it's going to be pretty close to divided. We don't know yet whether Republicans will maintain control, whether it's possible that Democrats could claw their way up to a 50-50 split, and that would technically give Democrats the edge because of the vice president's vote. So my question is, do you think Democrats have any chance at this point of expanding the size of the Supreme Court?
Well, I think it would be premature to go there at this point. I've been a lawyer most of my life, and I believe that you make your case first, and then you ask for your remedy. And Democrats have not made their case about the court effectively. We still don't have a very thorough understanding of all the procedural anomalies and what went wrong, particularly with respect to the truncated FBI investigation of Justice Kavanaugh. We know very little about how and who paid big money to get at the table where the last three judges were selected, perhaps by big private interests. We still don't know who funded the judicial campaigns, the TV ad campaigns for them. And there's a lot more to look into from the Washington Post's reporting on this whole network that has been set up by big special interests to try to control all of this process and to try to capture the court for their benefit. So I think that is the important piece of work that we have to do. And if the Senate can't do it because we don't have gavels, then it's going to fall to the House to take it seriously and do some investigative work.
These are concerns that you certainly raised during Amy Coney Barrett's confirmation process. Is this something that you think Democrats will prioritize and tackle early in the new year, these sort of questions or that sort of investigation?
Yeah, I think we have to. We've been asleep at the wheel dealing with this court capture effort for a long, long time. We have not connected the dots. That has begun to happen. And I think, any American will, I hope, agree that when judicial nominations are accompanied by very bizarre procedural anomalies, when big special interests have bought apparently secret rights to the table where judges are selected, where anonymous donations of tens of millions of dollars are being made to pay for ad campaigns for nominees, all of that smells to high heaven. That is not the way this is supposed to work. And it creates a bad stink around the court that needs to be dissipated one way or the other.
Senate control will, in fact, probably come down to Georgia. How important do you see those likely two runoffs now in that state for the next 2 months?
Yeah, obviously, they're critical. If Joe Biden wants to have a robust presidency, then he has to help us win those 2 seats. Mitch McConnell will otherwise be out to bedevil him every single possible day and obstruct in every way that he can. So if we could win one or both of those, it would make a big difference. It makes it a 50-50 Senate with Vice President Kamala Harris breaking the tie. And that changes things a lot in terms of, who has gavels and who can issue subpoenas and who controls the floor and what legislation can be brought up. All of those things are vitally important to a successful Biden presidency. And thankfully, we've learned a lot about Georgia recently. We've learned, guess what? Not by much, but they voted Democrat. And we know there's a big constituency along the coast for doing something about climate change because their properties are threatened with sea level rise. And we know there's a newly animated minority community with the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church as one of our 2 candidates. And we know that young voters will believe that they just pulled off a win there that they didn't expect. So there are lots of positives for us going into this, but we can't take any of that for granted. We just have to really work our tails off.
Senator Whitehouse, we're out of time, but I'm going to slip one last question right under the rug. Joe Biden has talked about wanting to return a degree of civility and normalcy to the country. Do you think that's actually possible? And would you prioritize that, or would you prioritize the Democratic agenda and try to worry about bipartisanship later?
I think you've got to reach for bipartisanship wherever you can, but be very alert to the bipartisanship trap in which, Lucy and Charlie Brown, they hold out the bipartisan football, and when you come to actually play, they yank it away. And the lure of bipartisanship is being used as a technique of obstruction, and that is something that he should not put up with. We learned that experience bitterly under President Obama, and we should not be having 2.0 and not have learned that lesson.
Senator Sheldon Whitehouse from Rhode Island, thank you very much for joining Axios.
Thanks.
And thanks to all of you for joining us this afternoon for another virtual conversation that's made everyone smarter, faster. Thanks to our sponsor, Bank of America, for making the conversation possible. And for the latest news, please follow our dashboard at Axios.com or on the Axios app. You can sign up for all Axios newsletters and Axios AM and PM at signup.axios.com. And before you go, we do want to share some news about what's next for Axios in the coming months. We'll be expanding into local markets to get you smarter, faster about where you live. For more information on our local news endeavor, check out axios.com/local. Thanks all of you for joining, and we'll see you on axios.com.